Microphone check, 1, 2, what is this? It's B. Michael here with Shifting Paradigms Business, and we live. That's right. Today is Monday, November 21st. My goodness, time is like flying. We are almost out of 2022. And we are here at the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center, where this radio station, this illustrious radio station, is brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association. We got Baba G here on the soundboard, holding it up and keeping it down, always doing a fantastic job. Want to shout out all the listeners, all the other broadcasters as well, all the other programs that are on this powerful station. And I am your host, B. Michael here, and we are going to be doing part 2 to our last broadcast with Israelite paradigmatics, and we're going to be talking tonight about who is Israel. Who is Israel, right? And so we're going to just go a little more in depth into that. As last week we covered some very important things, got over some genome studies, some genetics. We studied some Talmud. We even went into some passages that discussed how, from oral tradition, how Israel appeared. And they were boxwood colored, right? And there are some others that also talk about how, some other passages that discuss how Israel's phenotype was like that of Ethiopians, the Kemetic people, the Mitzrites, right? When you had the burial of Jacob and the procession of Joseph and his children, his brothers and his countrymen leaving with the Egyptians, when the Canaanites saw them, they was like, this is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians. We discussed how also Paul was mistaken as Egyptian. And then when you even consider that, Moses, when he was, even Joseph, when Joseph was in Egypt, when he was in Kemet, when he was in Mitzrayim, his brothers couldn't even tell him from the Egyptians. They couldn't tell. They didn't even know that was Joseph, right? Moses was in Egypt, right? Blended right into the house of Pharaoh. And then you had Yahushua, the Messiah, himself, hiding in Egypt when Herod was killing all the children. Egypt, right? So these are things that we have to always take into account and consider when we're looking at the historicity of this matter. And so tonight, we're just going to take this a little step further. We're going to get into some additional ideas about this. But first, of course, always shifting paradigms. Our mission is to stimulate critical thought in order to realistically redefine our narrative and positively reshape our reality through dialogue with Kuji Chagalia, self-determination. So that's what we're about. And this is our 3rd year. Wow, we've been doing this almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years going in the next month. Wow. Woo-wee. We started this in 2019, January of 2019, before the pandemic. This is just with Shifting Paradigms, KUAW. I've been since 16. It's been since 16. This has been going on since 2016.
Yeah, we started
2015. 7 years. Powerful. About to go on 8.
Yeah.
So that's powerful, a community presence. And of course, the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center has been in the community for over 30 years, you know, doing some tutoring. Also, we have robotics here. A lot of other community programs going on, but this is a very essential pillar in the African-American community here in Kansas City, Missouri. You know, founded by the illustrious Bill Grace and Leon Dixon, you know, 2 geniuses and 2 powerful elders in our community. I always want to give a shout out to my Babas, Baba Grace and Baba Dixon. Shout out to them, no doubt. But I want to dedicate this show tonight to several people, to a few communities and a couple of rabbis. The communities I want to shout out are the communities of Beta Israel. Beta Israel are also known as the Falasha. The Falasha are the Ethiopian Jews, and they're going to prefigure pretty big tonight in the information that I want to present. Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, okay? We want to shout out the Limba. The Limba are South African Jews in the Zimbabwe and South African area. The Igbo, which are Nigerian Jews, and the Jews of Abba Yahudaya. They are actually in the areas of Kenya. and Mozambique. Okay, so these are African Jewish communities. African Jewish communities who observe Torah, right? They're Torah observant communities of African people who trace their lineage, in fact, to Eastern Africa, Northeastern Africa, more specifically, of the country of Israel. Okay? Interestingly, the word falasha is a word that means exile. So they're understood to be going back even before Queen Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, who visited Solomon during her reign and during King Solomon's reign and sired Menelik, King Menelik, from which Haile Selassie I is said to have descended, Emperor Rastafari Makonnen, the last conquering line of Judah in Ethiopia, who reigned, right, from that throne. But they are said to descend prior to that from the tribes of Dan, who during the Assyrian captivity went into Africa and found refuge. And it's so interesting, whenever you saw famine, wherever you saw trouble and hardship, again, mentioning Joseph, right? Looking at the brothers, what they did when the famine came during the days of Jacob. Where'd they go? Egypt. Excuse me. Abraham, where did he go? Egypt, when there was a famine. Egypt. Why did they go to Africa? Because that was, proximity-wise, really the closest country to them outside of what is known as Canaan. So it's very interesting to notate, right? But even, of course, we just mentioned Yehoshua ben Yosef, who the world, I will say again, erroneously calls Jesus Christ, went to Egypt for refuge. So it's no mistake that this country, which are bordering countries, right? Gaza is like 2 hours from Egypt, walking distance, that Israel is right there, continentally speaking. We talked about that too, the tectonics, the geology of that particular region. But we also want to dedicate this show to Rabbi Wentworth Matthews, who was a rabbi in the early 19th century in Harlem, New York, who founded the Commandment Keepers from the Caribbean, as well as a Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford, who was the individual, and I spoke about this in the second episode that I had with a brother, Kimathi Malaku Els. We talked about identity paradigmatics. Rabbi Josiah Ford penned the national anthem to the Universal Negro Improvement Association, founded by Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So Israelite consciousness prefigured in the UNIA, under Marcus Garvey, Honorable, peace be upon him, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So these two rabbis were instrumental in bringing Israelite consciousness in the early 20th century to people who are known as African American. Okay, and then when we look in this region, you had William Saunders Crowdy, who promoted Israelite consciousness in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? You had William Christian as well, and F.S. Cherry, who are other rabbis who also promoted Israelite consciousness amongst so-called African American people. So this is nothing new. This is not a new phenomenon. When we go back even prior to that, Harriet Tubman was known as Black Moses, right? You have Israel Hill on the Potomac. And there's many preceding forms of consciousness of Israelite ancestry amongst so-called Negroes. Of course, again, we go back to the western coast of Africa and to the eastern coast of Africa. You go to Yemen and you'll find some of the earliest traces of Judaism also in Yemen, where there are African peoples as well. But diving right into this, let's go ahead and dive right into this. Who is Israel? What delineates Israel? And this is something I mentioned last week that I want to articulate again. And this is very important because one of the main challenges that Israel has always faced, and you can even see this in the days of the Messiah, is that Israel relied on the merit of our ancestors. That means that we just touted that we are Israel because we're just flesh and blood Israel. We're born Israel. But that's not what makes an Israelite a true Israelite, right? And I mentioned this last week because an Israelite is one who has the Torah written on their hearts. And they observe the ways and think the thoughts of the Most High. This is why you even read in Isaiah, the Most High says, your ways are not my ways, your thoughts are not my thoughts. And so we have to find a way, going back to the beginning of creation on that sixth day when Yah created humanity in his image and in his likeness, right? So the ways of Yah would be related to the likeness. The thoughts of Yah would be related to the image. What images are you capturing in your mind, right? What perceptions do you have? And so as we read in the Messianic scriptures, there's a rabbi from Tarsus who is Shaul, Rav Shaul of Tarsus, a Benjaminite from the tribe of Benjamin, who was also mistaken as an Egyptian during his days. In the book of Acts, you read that. He says in the second chapter of Romans, verses 25 to 29, he said, the circumcision indeed profits if you practice the Torah. That's what makes you an Israelite. Are you practicing the Torah? But if you are a transgressor of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. That means you're pretty much a heathen. You're a Gentile. You're an idolater. You're an infidel. So if an uncircumcised one of the flesh watches over the righteousness of the Torah, shall not his uncircumcision be reckoned as circumcision? It is about orthopraxy, and we've talked about this before. It's not about just what you believe. It's about what you do. What fruit are you bearing? Israel is one who produces the right fruit. What's up with you, my man, Jay Knight? Always good seeing you up in here. I got the Instagram live going, so one of my comrades is up in here, so I want to shout him out. But again, one who is uncircumcised of nature, who watches over the righteousness of the Torah, shall not his uncircumcision be reckoned as circumcision? And the uncircumcised by nature, who perfects the Torah, who perfects it, right? That means they are blameless. You can't find a fault with them in their observance of Torah. Shall judge you, who notwithstanding letter and circumcision, that means you're doing the form and the fashion of it, but the substance is missing. Your heart is not in it. You are a transgressor of the Torah. You're going to be judged by what you would consider the uncircumcised. For he is not a Yahudi. He is not a Jew, if you will, from the tribe of Judah or Judea, the southern tribes, Benjamin, Levi, and Judah, who is so outwardly. Neither is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. It's not about your flesh. It's not about what you riding on in the flesh. But a Yahudi is he who is so inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart, in spirit, not literally. What is your spirit like, right? What fruit are you producing in the spirit? Whose praise is not from men, but from Elohim. This is what makes an Israelite an Israelite. They have fulfilled the new covenant. The new covenant, if you will, found in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, is about having the Torah written on your heart. That's what makes an Israelite, that they love the Most High with all their heart, soul, and strength. And the second commandment, much like the first, is you love your neighbor as yourself. That's what makes an Israelite an Israelite. And this goes for anybody. How do we know that? In the book of Numbers, chapter 15, verses 15 and 16, it says this: one law is for you of the assembly and for the stranger who sojourns with you. One law is for you of the assembly and for the stranger who sojourns with you, a law forever throughout your generations. As you are, Israel, so is the stranger before you, Gentile. One Torah and one right ruling is for you and for the stranger who sojourns with you. This is because you have to keep in mind again, Israel is a kingdom of priests. We are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And much like immigrants who come from other countries to the United States, go about acquiring their citizenship here in the United States of America, it is the same thing that can happen with the kingdom of Yah. You can acquire your citizenship by observing the principles and the laws and the statutes and taking on the nature of the king, Yad-Heh-Wah-Heh, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to go about becoming a citizen of this illustrious and eternal kingdom. And so the expectation, what are the expectations for those who are professing to be Israel? What is expected of you? What should you be doing? How should you conduct yourself? This is from Deuteronomy, the law, just like Numbers is from the law. Deuteronomy 10 tells us, and now Israel, what is Yah your Elohim asking of you? But to fear Yah your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, to guard the commands of Yah and his laws, which I command you today for your good. Right? That's the expectation. That's the standard. That is what your heart should be producing. Obedience, faithfulness, if you will. Not just faith. You can have faith, but not have faithfulness. You can believe in something and still not do it. Right? That's why James, the apostle, Yaakov ben Yosef, Ach, Yahoshua, HaMashiach, the brother of the Messiah, Yahoshua, says, faith without works is dead. You have to have works to demonstrate your faith. This is why you have to produce righteous fruit. Right? So taking that idea of obedience and faithfulness and what Yah expects of his children to do, of his citizens, his subjects even, if you will, as the king of Israel to do, Micah 6:8 says, he is declared to you, O man, what is good? And what does Yah require of you but to do right and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your Elohim? To do right, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your Elohim. And then lastly, we can go to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. I don't have this down, but I know the essence of it. It says, here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear Elohim and guard his commandments, for this applies to all humankind. That's what makes an Israelite an Israelite. You fear the Most High, you keep the commandments. Right? You love the Most High. That's what the demonstration of love is, when you keep the commandments. It's like if you make vows with your spouse, with your wife or your husband, you uphold those vows. Yes, it is 6:22. I see you. So yes, faithfulness is a clear demonstration of love. Okay? You got a comment on there? Yeah, more. It means teacher in Hebrew. Hallelujah. Yes, indeed. Thank you for your comments, for tuning in. You're listening to Shifting Paradigms with B. Michael. I'm your host. We're talking about Israelite Paradigmatics Part 2. Who is Israel? And we just went over what makes an Israelite an Israelite. And it's about faithfulness. It's about, again, observance of Torah. Because there's going to be a lot of charlatans out now that Kanye and Kyrie have come out with their pronouncements and said blacks, quote unquote, blacks are Israelites. There's going to be a lot of different Venus flytraps out here trying to capture people and bring them into their web of deceit, if you will. Right? So if you don't know what the Torah prescribes, what the law prescribes, and what the truth is based on the word of the Most High, which is in Torah, and the scriptures, right? The prophets and the writings and the witness, right? If you're not versed in well understanding of what is in there, you can get caught up real quick. If you are just in the mouth of talkers and you just saying and going by what your pastor say, which is why Yahushua came to rebuke his leadership and the people who just blindly followed them and held on to every word they said without doing the research themselves and proving all things yourself, you gone. You lost in the sauce. So it's essential for you to be studied. That's why I said study to show yourselves approved, right? So you may be a worker, not ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. because people are going to be taking some heads. I'm telling you. There's going to be a monumental amount of deception and delusion and confusion and illusion that's going to be taking place. I guarantee that. Shalom, Auntie. Thank you for joining in. I am Jeremy Pastel as well. Thank you for joining in on Instagram. You can follow us on YouTube. You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter. It's all kinds of different platforms that KUAW is hosting. So definitely, be sure to follow, subscribe, even make some donations to KUAW because, this is not just a free effort. We got to make sure that we're paying the bills here as well, keeping this moving. And so there's some articles I want to go over real quick, right? Let's look at this one article from Medium. The name of the article is that evidence proves that black people are the biblical Israelites. There's DNA evidence. This is an article written by this brother who goes by Addison. He says the DNA evidence suggests that the biggest genetic diversity in the world is of African people. Not all black people come from the same tribe, nor do all Africans have the same DNA. That being said, African Americans and other black people scattered around the world during the slave trade have different genetic codes than other Africans in Africa. Black people of the diaspora, unlike other Africans, trace their DNA ancestry back to the land of Israel. Many Africans still living in Africa today have this same genetic code. For example, the Limba tribe of Zimbabwe. That's why I shouted the Limba out, because they trace their code to the Levitical line. Specifically, the Levitical line. They're Levites, okay? We talked about the appearance of how Joseph and his brothers and sisters were mistaken as Egyptians. Okay, we discussed how Moses was identified as an Egyptian, how Paul was identified as an Egyptian. So their appearance is clear. Interestingly, when we look at some history of this, the historicity, again, Israel moved from Israel to West Africa. This is something that Flavius Josephus wrote in his book, The Great Roman Jewish War from 66 to 70. Josephus says that General Vespasian and his son Caesar Titus fought against the Jews. Millions of Jews fled into Africa, among other places, fleeing from Roman persecution and starvation during the siege. This is from Flavius Josephus. They fled into Africa. Okay. Also, according to Tariq el-Sudan, who was recorded by Abdurrahman bin Abdallah el-Sadi, a Jewish community was formed by a group of Egyptian Jews who had traveled to the west of Africa through Chad. Okay. And so you can see that there. Leo Africanus, who traveled extensively in Africa, south of the Sahara, where he encountered innumerable black African Jewish communities. Leo later converted to Catholicism, but remained interested in Jewish communities he encountered throughout his travels in West Africa. Guess where they took the enslaved Africans from in the transatlantic slave trade? West Africa. So Leo Africanus, he says, was one who observed African Jews in the continent. Before Europeans invaded Africa, many of our ancestors were practicing the same customs of the Torah. There's a book called Hebrewisms of West Africa by a Jesuit priest by the name of Joseph Williams. Hebrewisms of West Africa. Okay. And so that is just some of the understandings of Israelite ancestry amongst African people. Again, when we look at the Beta Israel from Ethiopia, they are said to have descended from the tribe of Dan. So this is a very interesting matter here. So Tacitus, a Roman historian, he wrote about Jews in his book, History, saying that many assure us they are a race of Ethiopian origin. This is what Tacitus said in his book, The Histories. Ethiopians are black Africans. So what he's saying is they're dark skinned. Okay. In other words, Tacitus stated that the Jews were of black African descent. Okay. So this is historic information, not just personal preference. This is what is being stated, there were two French travelers from the 18th century, Conrad Malte Brun and James Gates Percival, who traveled around Africa during the same time of the slave trade and documented the tribes in Africa. While traveling through the kingdom of Loango, which is present-day Congo, they came across black Jews. In their book, A System of Universal Geography, a description of all the parts of the world, they write, and I quote, "The kingdom of Loango contains black Jews scattered throughout the country. They are despised by the Negroes," so they were hated on by other African people, "who do not even deign to eat with them. They are occupied in trade and keep the Sabbath so strictly that they do not even converse on that day. They have a separate burying ground very far from any habituation. The tombs are constructed with masonry and ornamented with Hebrew inscriptions," end quote. There were Portuguese slave traders and travelers who said that, quote, "Some people here believe in Muhammad, but the majority are idol worshippers," wrote the nameless Portuguese navigator. "In this land there are Jews known as Gauls, and they are black like the rest of the inhabitants, but they have no synagogues and do not conduct Jewish ceremonies. They do not live with the other blacks, but separately." He reported, because they do not dare enter the villages, they locate themselves behind the houses of the ruler of the village, and at dawn they sing his praises until he grants them a portion of millet, and then they go. If they didn't do so, the rest of the blacks would not tolerate them. So great is their hatred for them, which forbids them from entering any house except for that of the ruler of the village. If they find them inside the village, they're beaten with sticks. And this is a result of the disobedience of our ancestors. It was told that they would be cursed and become a derision to all peoples, right? Because of their faithlessness. They would be turned over. Historical account from the 1700s describes the connection between West Africans and the Israelites. This account is from an African man of the Igbo tribe of Nigeria named Oluda Equiano. He was kidnapped from Nigeria and was enslaved in Barbados and Virginia. He was somehow able to purchase his freedom and went on to become a writer and abolitionist. In his autobiography, he not only documented the horrors of slavery, but he also wrote about his culture back home during the slave trade. He detailed how his tribe practiced the same customs of the Jews in the Hebrew Bible called the Torah. Quote, Oluda Equiano says, "We practiced circumcision like the Jews and made offerings and feasts on that occasion in the same manner as they did. Such is the imperfect sketch my memory has furnished me with of the manners and customs of a people among whom I drew my first breath." And here I cannot forbear suggesting what was long struck me very forcibly, namely the strong analogy which, even by this sketch, imperfect as it is, appears to prevail in the manners and customs of my countrymen and those of the Jews before they reached the land of promise, and particularly the patriarchs while they were yet in the pastoral state which is described in Genesis. He goes on to say, like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs or judges, our wise men and elders, and the head of a family with us enjoyed a similar authority over his household with that which is ascribed to Abraham and the other patriarchs. The law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us as with them, and even when their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of its glory, though broken and spent in its passage, or eclipsed by the cloud with which time, tradition, and ignorance might have enveloped it, for we had our circumcision, a rule, I believe, peculiar to that people. We had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washings and purifications, on the same occasions as they had. That's Oluda Equiano, okay? And so just a few to go with that article there. I'm not going to belabor that particular article. There are a few more that I want to have to present in this time that I have left here. This is an article from the Washington Informer by a Dr. Jamal Dominique Hopkins called "Exploring the African Roots of Judaism." He's saying this here. I'm just going to kind of give us the summation of it. He says the Ethiopian Jews are biblical Jews, quoting a woman by the name of, where's the woman's name? I beg your pardon for the delay. Well, he quotes a woman. She says, the Ethiopian Jews are biblical Jews, she exclaimed, who can date their Jewish ancestry at least 10 generations back and can trace their lineage to the biblical King Solomon of Israel and the Ethiopian Queen of Sheba. This Ethiopian young lady mentioned that besides their biblical understanding of Judaism, opposed to the Ashkenazi European Jews who embrace a rabbinical form of Judaism, many of her forefathers had never seen white Jews and frankly did not know they existed when they first encountered them during the Israeli operations to the Sudan, formerly the region known as ancient Nubia, or what the Bible calls Cush, and Ethiopia. Other Jews of African descent, like the Limba tribe in South Africa, many of which have Aaronic priestly DNA, can be dated to the time of Moses and his brother Aaron. Such deep African descended roots beg for a more transparent examination of the Jewish as well as the Christian roots of African descended people of Israel and Africa. And I'll never forget when I went to Israel in 2016, I entered into the Damascus Gate, and almost no sooner than I entered into the Damascus Gate, I encountered a man from Chad by the name of Ali Jida. Ali Jida is an Afro-Palestinian, however, he practices Islam, but he was a tour guide of Jerusalem, the old city particularly, and he clearly stated that Africans are the indigenous people of that land. And prior to 1948, that land was occupied primarily by African people, even prior to the Ottoman Empire's occupation of Jerusalem, okay? In fact, there was a quarter where the Western Wall is today that was called the Moorish Quarter in Jerusalem, the Moorish Quarter. And we know who Moors are, okay? They were Hebrew Moors. A lot of people just think Moors are Muslim. No, there were Hebrew Moors as well. In fact, that's what was in Spain doing a lot of work as well. There were Hebrew Moors in Spain doing a lot of work as well. Well, I just want to leave that article there. There's one more article, then I want to have a passage and then get into one last article and hopefully wrap this all up. This is an article from Cilio.org of South Africa. This is a journalistic article talking about the teaching the history of ancient Israel from an African perspective, the invasion of Sennacherib, the Assyrian king of 701 BC. And I'm just going to read the abstract. These will be posted on my blog, shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com. Shifting Paradigms is spelled with no vowels. So if you want to check out the website, you can go there and subscribe to the website and support it. The abstract by David Tuesday Adamo, he says this: in teaching the history of ancient Israel in Africa, the importance of ancient Africa, which ancient Israel herself underscored, has not received much attention. All the countries mentioned in Israel, particularly in the Bible, in Genesis particularly, are African countries. Even when you're dealing with Indus Kush, when you're dealing with Mesopotamia, you're dealing with Nimrod over in Mesopotamia, or what is known as Babylon or Chaldea, those were Cushites. Nimrod was a Cushite. The Sagiga people, and we talked about this last time, all the ancient valleys, including the Yellow Valley, the Yellow River Valley, the Euphrates River Valley, the Nile River Valley, right? All those river valleys were originally occupied according to, I don't want to just say this from my opinion, according to individuals such as Godfrey Higgins, and I mentioned these people last week, Martin Bernal, were occupied by black-skinned people, melanated people, okay? But again, Africa prefigures in much of the Hebrew scriptures and what ancient Israel herself underscored, which has not received much attention. In most African higher institutions today, even in Africa, the history of ancient Israel is taught verbatim the way it is taught in Euro-American institutions. The ancient nations of Africa mentioned in the biblical and archaeological texts, such as Egypt, Ethiopia, and Cush, etc., and their roles in ancient Israel should be mentioned and emphasized as part of African contributions to the history of ancient Israel, including the population. This is where Israel becomes a nation in Egypt. They became a nation in Egypt. They went in 70 deep, and it says that they came out 6 million. Okay? They didn't just like lay with each other. In fact, when they came out of Egypt, according to scriptures, it was a mixed multitude that accompanied them. Okay? African people, though. Let's keep that in mind. They were in Egypt, which is in Africa. I saw a video today of some archaeologists in Egypt doing some DNA testing and MRIs on some skeletons, some mummies. Dude was hot because he found out that he was a Cushite. This mummy by the name of Shimei was a Cushite. He was a Nubian. He was brokenhearted. Like, oh my goodness, we thought that they were white. And I'm not saying, again, race has become a socioeconomic and political construct by those who use it to further their agenda. At the end of the day, there's only one race. At the end of the day, there's only one race, right? But it becomes a matter of extreme pride and nationalism, extreme nationalism, to the degree where it separates humanity. But that was used during what's known as Shays' Rebellion and Bacon's Rebellion in America, where race became a real prefigured matter. Although the Aryans also use it in India, and you had the dot system with the Dravidians or the untouchables, quote unquote, being given the black dots. So that's where it really comes from. But this was not an African matter here. Even though we did isolate and segregate the albinos, yes, we did. The mutants, we did do that. But I digress. I'm not even going to open up that can of worms. Continuing on. Ancient Africa and Africans were mentioned about 1,417 times in the Old Testament scriptures. Right? 1,417 times ancient Africa and Africans were mentioned. Egypt, Ethiopia, Punt, which is Libya, and others. Africans participated in the Battle of Ashdod, El Teche, and Jerusalem during the invasion of Sennacherib to defend ancient Israel and also to obstruct their rivals, the Assyrians, right? Pichol, right? You have people who defended Israel from these other foreigners. In teaching the history of ancient Israel in African higher institutions, current problems associated with the identification of Egypt and Ethiopia as African countries, divergent scholars' opinion, and the proper definition of history are discussed. Jerusalem could have fallen in 701 BCE during Sennacherib's siege instead of 587 BCE during the siege by the Babylonians. Thus, the Africans' obstruction of the Assyrians in defense of Hezekiah has delayed the fall of Jerusalem more than 100 years. An example of how the history of ancient Israel can be taught Afrocentrically in the African higher institutions is reflected by the examination of Sennacherib's invasion in 701 BCE. The way the Old Testament is taught may to a large extent determine the future of Old Testament studies in Africa. So Africa prefigured largely in the history of ancient Israel. And there was an article that I mentioned from Haaretz that said that ancient Judeans looked like black Africans. The article is entitled, "How White Were the Israelites?" Archaeologists suggest that the ancient Israelites looked like black Africans. This is what the article's headline and subtitle are. So I'm just going to leave that article there. And let me get into this next passage because this is where the rubber hits the road. Again, when we're talking about Israel being Israel of the flesh, that is not important. What is important, again, is a matter of the heart. Even though we know historically, we're finding historically, when you're dealing with Israel on the African tectonic plate, when you're dealing with Israel as relates to a Mediterranean country and Gloger's rule or Gloger's law being established, that the people there have to be melanated. They have to be melanated. You're knowing that this people who originate from this land are in fact Natufian, Bantu, African people. Again, Semitic, to be Semitic means you are a speaker of an Afro-Asiatic language, a Black Asian's language, which comes again at its root from Bantu people. Okay, this is where the Natufian come in. And these are the people from which Adam descended. Let me go ahead and bring this next passage up and then one last article and I'm going to wrap it all up. Or two articles. Because we're going to look at the nature, okay? This is from John 8:25-47. It says, they said to the Messiah, "Who are you?" And Yahushua said to them, "Altogether that which I even say to you. I have much to say and to judge concerning you, but he who sent me is true, and what I heard from him, these words I speak to the world." They did not know that he spoke to them of the Father. Yahushua said to them, "When you lift up the Son of Adam, then you shall know that I am he, and that I do none at all of myself, but as my Father taught me, these words I speak. And he who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. This is that faithfulness. This is what made him a true Israelite. As he was speaking these words, many believed in him. So Yahushua said to the Yahudim who believed him, if you stay in my word, you are truly my taught ones, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Huge. They answered him, we are the seed of Abraham and have been servants to no one at any time. How do you say you shall become free? Yahushua answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone doing sin is a servant of sin. This is what lets us know who we are. If we're Israel, we've overcome sin and death. If we're not, we're still bound to sin, and we become a child of sin, right? And the servant does not stay in the house forever. A son stays forever. If then the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. I know that you are the seed of Abraham, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. This is where that delineation comes clear. I speak what I have seen with my father, and you do not, and you do what you have heard from your father. They answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. Yahushua said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. This is where it's so important. What are we doing? Who are we following? What commandments are we keeping? Whose word are we honoring? What are we faithful to? The Torah or to ecclesiastical law, which is a Catholic law, which is the fourth beast of Revelation? Okay, I digress from that though. He says, but now you seek to kill me. But again, I'm going to go back. If you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Abraham kept the Torah exclusively. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has spoken to you the truth which I heard from Elohim. Abraham did not do this. You do the works of your father. Then they said to him, we were not born of whoring. We have one father, Elohim. Yahushua said to them, if you were your father, you would love me. For I came forth from Elohim and am here. For I have not come of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not do what I say? Because you are unable to hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you wish to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and has not stood in the truth, because the truth is not in him. When he speaks the lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Who of you proves me wrong concerning sin? And if I speak the truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of Elohim hears the words of Elohim. Therefore you do not hear, because you are not of Elohim. And I'm going to close with these two articles here. This first article comes to us from the Jerusalem Post. Actually, I got a couple things to say before I go on. This article was written on January 28th of 2019 by Seth J. Frantzman in the Jerusalem Post. It's entitled, When Ethiopian Jews Tried to Save European Jews from the Holocaust. Ethiopian Jews suffered under the Italian occupation, but by 1943 they were able to reach out to the Emperor Haile Selassie I to suggest hosting Jews fleeing Europe. This is what the Ethiopians, or Beta Israel, did in 1943. They reached out to their emperor, Haile Selassie I, was like, hey, we got some brothers of Torah who are suffering in Europe. Let's let them come here, right? Let them come to Ethiopia, and we can host them and shelter them and give them refuge. In 1943 of August, at the height of the Holocaust, Ethiopian Jewish leaders approached the Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia with a daring proposal. They asked him to help Jews in Europe flee to Ethiopia and assist Jewish refugees by hosting them in Ethiopian Jewish villages. I'm just going to leave that there. 1943, Ethiopian Jews, Beta Israel, reach out to their emperor to rescue and provide refuge and sanctuary for European Jews. What's the turnaround of that? How do the European Jews turn around and act? Whose works are they doing? This is an article from geneticsandSociety.org, the Center for Genetics and Society. It's by Diane Tober, who wrote this article on February 7, 2013, titling the article, Israel, the state of Israel admits targeting Ethiopian Jews for compulsory conception. Who's doing Abraham's works here? And I'm not saying all European Jews are like that. And I'm not saying all Ethiopian Jews are righteous either. But when you look at this totally, who is doing Abraham's works? Revelation 2:9 and 3:9 says, I know your struggle and your works, and you dwell amongst those who say they are Jews but are not Jews, but are of the synagogue of Satan. Who are they talking about? Who are they talking about? Those who are doing the works of Satan. That's who they're talking about. From Biopolitical Times, this is when she wrote this. Biopolitical Times, after 5 years of denials, they lied for 5 years, Israeli government officials have admitted to targeting Ethiopian Jewish immigrant women with long-acting contraceptive injections without their consent. That's devilish. That's devilish, right? That's devilish. Most of the women were either coerced into accepting the Depo-Vera injections while living in Israeli-run transit camps in Ethiopia, or were unaware that the injections produced temporary sterilization. This controversy first surfaced in 2008 when Seba Reuvin interviewed 35 Ethiopian women awaiting immigration to Israel. Some of their stories were included in a report by Israeli investigative journalist Gal Gabe that aired several weeks ago on Israeli educational television. One Ethiopian woman explained, quote, we said we won't have the shot. They told us if you don't, you won't go to Israel. You won't get aid or medical care. We were afraid. We didn't have a choice. Without them and their aid, we couldn't leave there. So we accepted the injection. It was only with their permission that we were allowed to leave. My. I'm just going to set that on the table. You can read the full article on the blog when I post it there. But I have another article from going back again to the Jerusalem Post. I don't have a date from this article here, but it's by a Chaim Shapiro, who was a Jerusalem Post reporter. This goes back to the 19th century, the 1800s, and I'm just going to read the headline. The headline is, again, Ashkenazim once sought help of Ethiopian Jews. He says, when the first Ashkenazi Jews came to the land of Israel in the 1800s, early in the last century, they appealed to the Jews of Ethiopia for spiritual guidance. Former Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goten told worshipers on Yom Kippur. As the clash between the present chief rabbis and the Ethiopian Jews who are demonstrating opposite the chief rabbinate in Jerusalem enters what appears to be an insoluble stalemate, Goren reiterated his view that the Ethiopian immigrants are full-fledged Jews who need no conversion ceremony. So what had taken place at one point in time was the Ashkenazim, European Jews, were demanding for Ethiopian Jews to be granted citizenship in Israel. They would have to undergo a conversion according to the European customs. When in fact, a letter translated recently by Harry Rosenberg, who was a rabbi in Israel, from the Vilna Gaon, who was the first chief rabbi of the Israeli Defense Federation in Israel in the 1800s, wrote a letter requesting 3 Ethiopian rabbis come to Jerusalem and perform what's called in Hebrew as shmicha, right? An ordination by laying on of hands on their rabbis so that they can have the authority to practice Judaism and Torah in Israel. So just let me read it. Let me just get to it so you all can see what's going on. This is the article. I just want to read the specific request. So he says here, which one is it? So first there were 4 requests. First was to pray for them. The second request was, here it is. What our hearts desire, this thing. It is well known from our rabbis that before the Messiah comes, there must be in the land of Israel a court comprised of those ordained in classical shmicha, which is the ordination. Yet through our sins and through the harsh decrees of the multiple exiles, the ordination has disappeared.
And the law is that only an ordained can ordain. And Yah promised that there will be a high court, as it says, I will restore your judges as it is in the past. Afterwards, you will be known as the city of justice, a center of truth. Zion shall be redeemed through justice and its returnees through charity. And this will happen without a doubt once the Creator helps people become attracted to the Torah before the coming of Mashiach. And as we have heard that you in Ethiopia have a Sanhedrin, you have a house of judgment in Ethiopia, ordained as you adjudicate capital cases. Please select some of your ordained wise men to come to Israel to ordain scholars so that we'll have in Israel a court comprised of ordained, because the beginning of the redemption hinges on this. And how appropriate would it be for great personages as they are to come to Israel, the land that the Tanas and the Amoras would kiss, right? Ethiopia. And our rabbi said that whoever dwells in the land, his sins are expiated. And even if he's just walked 4 cubits in it, merits the world to come, right? And our great rabbi said that living in the land of Israel is considered a positive Torah commandment, even today, as we have learned in the Sifrei, or the reading regarding the verse, you shall inherit them and live in their land, that living in the land is equal to all the commandments of the Torah. And currently the land has respite from the oppression of the nations, accepting the tributes that we have to pay the ruler of the land. And even if the Torah didn't permit the nation in its entirety to come to the land of Israel, nowadays for individuals, there is no prohibition, as indeed throughout the generation Jews have come. So, this is very profound, that the European Jews, in order to practice Torah in Israel, sent delegates to Ethiopia and this letter to request rabbis from Ethiopia to come to Jerusalem and perform a shmicha on the European Jews so that they can practice the Torah in Israel. But here it is, when Ethiopia needed Europe's assistance to flee from their persecutions in Ethiopia, they were forcing them to convert according to their customs, when they got their customs and their power and authority from Ethiopia. Who's who? Who is who? Who is doing the works of Abraham? Right? Ethiopia sought to provide refuge for the Ashkenazim during World War II. But here it is, in the 20th century, you got European Jews sterilizing Ethiopian women, forcing Ethiopia to give up their generations and millennia-long customs of observing Torah to follow your expression of keeping Torah? Really? Really? So where's the anti-Semiticism? Who's anti-Semitic? Right? So if we're really dealing with this, who is demonstrating anti-Semiticism, historically speaking? Who owned the slave ships, historically speaking? And this is not applicable to all Jews, because there's Jews who are very outspoken against the slave trade, right? But we got to understand and know well for certain that powers that be have an identity. And they're in league with others as well. You know, even some of us, because we've got some traitors in our camp as well. We got some Benedict Arnolds in our camp as well. Well, believe that. Believe that. But what this comes down to is what Genesis 3:15 says, right? You have a seed of a serpent and you got a seed of a woman. And it is time for us to really smoke out of this grass this seed of the serpent and crush this serpent's head. This is what the scripture says to do. It says to do this, right? He's going to bruise our heel. It says that. He'll bruise our heel, but we got to crush his head. And the way that we crush this serpent's head is we unify. We come together as humanity. We come together as the children of Israel. We stand up, we keep the Most High's commands, and we divest from everything that is not of Yah in the kingdom. That's how you crush this serpent's head. That's the most simple way to do it. Now, we got to protect ourselves. We have to defend ourselves, because a beast is a beast. A serpent is a serpent, and that's what you got to well understand. A serpent is going to be a serpent all day. But we have to know how to align ourselves first and foremost in the will of the Most High, right? Keep the Torah. Love Yah with all of our heart, soul, and strength. Love our neighbor as ourselves. Repent. Turn back. That's the answer. That is the answer. Teshuvah is what it's called in Hebrew. Teshuvah, to turn back. That's what prophets proclaim. Turn back. Keep the Torah. Keep the commandments, which is your demonstration of love to our Father and our King. He's not just our Father. He is our King. Let's keep that in mind. Yah is our King. Who are you serving? Choose you this day who you shall serve. Israel. Right? That's what this comes down to. Right? Know Yah's ways. Know Yah's thoughts. Get in that word and find out and then do it. Perform it. Keep it. And that's the basis of it. That's the basis of it. But I'm B. Michael. This is Shifting Paradigms. We talked about Israelite paradigmatics. This is part 2 of this matter dealing with the Kyrie and Kanye controversy. I hope that what has been presented has been edifying. I hope that it's been challenging. I hope that you all have been stimulated by this matter. I want to give all praise to the Most High for anything that has been edifying, anything that has contributed to some insight, to some research that you do. Do your own research. Don't take anything anybody says. Prove all things for yourself, first and foremost, and let the Most High reveal to you what the will is that He has for His people, right? If there's been any error, chalk that up to me. Make the comments. Comment on this stream. Comment on it. Let me know how you felt about it, what your thoughts are, so we can just have some interaction and we can go forward from there. But again, this is B. Michael, Shifting Paradigms here on KUAW Radio, brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association. I'm signing out. It's time to eat. Much love, y'all. Shalom, shalom.